This series is going to show how to build a fairly rendered charcoal landscape. So we're going to be working quite tonally with this landscape. And I'm just using kind of a mixture of imagination and a reference. So I'll briefly show the reference I'm using and then cut back to the drawing. It's difficult to fit the reference and the drawing in next to each other with this one. But you'll get some idea of what we're working from. But mainly we want to think about how we would begin the drawing and then create a sense of depth through a layered atmosphere. So it's quite a misty subject that I'm working from, as you can see. So I've got that up on screen now. And you'll notice because of this mistiness, there's this sort of gradation almost through planes in the image. So looking through a forest, since this is a shot I took myself on a walk. So we're looking through a forest and you can see the trees closer to us are darker. And gradually as they go kind of further away, partly they're receiving more light because they're not in shadow, but also the mist is starting to catch light, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit as we go on. It's a good example of what's called aerial perspective, so as things go further back they get lighter. Not strictly a good example of the blueness of aerial perspective, but we're not too worried about that because we're working in charcoal. So to begin with, I just want to start kind of sketching roughly the boundary of where I want the drawing to be within the paper. So I can kind of very lightly think about what kind of width I'm going to go for. Now, unlike a portrait or a figure, I'm not too constrained by kind of having to super accurately copy anything. So I can use aspects of it, can take aspects of it away or play things up and down. Landscapes are a nice place to sort of experiment with charcoal. So we've got a general idea there. You can see there's this sort of light box drawn on the paper. Now we're going to be working a bit looser than usual, so often I kind of block everything in kind of with really specific articulated lines, but as I say, it doesn't matter so much with this one. So we're just going to be kind of roughly kind of adding tone across the drawing. So places we know are going to get pretty dark can go dark fairly quickly. Side there, for instance. They're going to end up fairly rendered, but for this kind of initial start, we're just thinking about where our lightest sections are. So we've got this kind of quite bright band through here. And we've got these kind of lighter trees. Back there. can see fairly quickly we can start to establish a fairly nice sense of the forest here. So you can start thinking about how branches drape off, sorts of shapes they make. And as we draw it in, we do want to think about kind of keeping it varied, so we don't want to get into too much of kind of regular rhythm. The biggest risk with this sort of thing is being a bit complacent and just starting to do things too sort of regularly, or in too sort of regular manner. And that just starts to become a little bit more boring than ideally you would want an image like this to be. So we want to maintain a good level of interest with the shapes and the values. We don't want stuff to just become repetitive, because it's just not quite as interesting to look at, and it's also not as natural if you do that. So we can also at this stage just start to kind of, you can use any kind of tool you want, so you could use like kitchen roll, or you can use brushes for this sort of thing, but like in paint I quite like using my hands. So we're going to quite ghostly build things up here, but you can see that starts to kind of add to the reality a little bit more, rather than it being too harsh, those lines. And it also starts to play into that sense of atmosphere that we ultimately want to achieve. So we can work over that now. You can see it's starting to look a little bit kind of softer. It's capturing that sense of atmosphere. So in this session we're not going for anything too detailed, just starting to kind of build up kind of a good sense of the sort of light that we're seeing. In the drawing. General placements of all these kind of layers of trees, and some of the more specific trees in the front as well. So like when we're working from portraits, so I did a recent series looking at portraiture. It works well to kind of work from the darker sections of the drawing down into the lighter sections of the drawing. If we jump straight into this lighter section, we're going to be at risk of going too dark, and then we're going to struggle to keep that sense of luminosity that ultimately we'll want. We really want to make it feel like that central bit through here is properly glowing, and we need to do that by establishing a good value relationship. So that's what this first stage is for. We're just starting to build up kind of a gradation from these darker layers, kind of nearer the viewer. Towards that lighter section in the middle. So I'm kind of, it's still sort of like working with a big form. So if you think of when we're working with a figure or a portrait, we're thinking about the big forms of the figure, so where things feel you want to kind of create a sense of like the overall statement of those forms, basically. So if you're thinking of the head, it's kind of like an egg shape, and it's going to, wherever the light is kind of hitting is going to be the lightest portion of the drawing. Just like that, we're thinking about the light source, so we kind of get a sense of the light glowing out from the center of this misty scene. And depending on how it goes, I'm thinking maybe might add some highlights in white chalk. I'm not quite sure. It's slightly toned paper, so we have some scope to mess around with that, which will be interesting. You can see sort of how ghostly I'm building up this drawing. And it's nice, quite a relaxing sort of drawing to do. It's a lot less stressful than working from a portrait or something like that. As I say, things don't have to be kind of bang on exactly like the subject. The main thing is you don't want too much regularity, so where it's good to have a little reference alongside, even if you're not exactly copying it, is just to see kind of how you can break rhythms up to make them more interesting, or like different shaped trees. So for instance, I might put a more kind of bent tree that I've got in my reference, so they're not all exactly the same shape, and kind of think about, start to think how branches are coming off that, but we don't want to, I'm not going to go into too much branch detail for now. Just going to kind of create, as I say, this kind of soft transition and just figure out a kind of major value statement. So I've gone pretty dark, but let's see how much darker we can possibly go. Some of these trees right up close, so they're going to be the darkest part of the drawing. It's useful just to be aware of that, even this early on. I won't go super dark everywhere, but I just want to see how dark this charcoal can possibly go. See, I can go pretty dark on that edge there. We want to go pretty dark on this side as well. We're just about there for a pretty nice kind of initial pass over a drawing like this. So we're starting to get everything nicely blocked in. Don't want to do too much more than that today, just to give you guys something to kind of aim for as you're working when you start your own. So it needn't necessarily be a misty scene, but a kind of misty scene's useful if you can find some on things like Unsplash or Pexels where you can get some free references, or if you know, ideally if you've got your own would be good. Yeah, it's not too bad as a start. So we've not necessarily established a fixed boundary for the drawing. That's something we can figure out at a later stage. It's good to sort of be fairly exploratory. Can try out some stuff like taking a few of these little notes out of the trees where the light would be shining through, and that's working pretty well, which is good. And that's what we'll be doing a lot more of as we progress. So I've noticed there is like a little bit of a distinction between the horizon line, which is sort of the distant forest, and the sky. So that's something to kind of think about and try to get in at this stage as well. But generally I've just been working pretty lightly, so all of it, you could sort of see how easy it is to, even in these darkest bits, to pretty much just erase back to complete white. So there's a lot of flexibility that we still have as we work. And we're going to go for something, even though it's starting quite loose, it will end up fairly rendered. It'd be nice to kind of develop a sense of the layering of the mist and really make that background glow out, which will be really good. What we're going to be doing in the next session is figuring out, kind of pulling apart the different layers of the drawing as well. So we've obviously got generally the value is determined by where that particular part of the drawing sits. So the stuff nearer to us, as I say, tends to be a bit darker. So any of these trees that are quite dark, they're closer to us. And then these kind of, there's some massier trees in the background which have quite specific edges. They tend to get kind of a bit lighter, and gradually everything gets really light as it gets in towards the hillside in the back of the drawing, and ultimately the sky behind, which really glows. But yeah, for today we'll leave it at that. So that's what I want you guys to do, kind of get your charcoal landscape sketch up to about this point. So you're just thinking about working quite loosely, building it up softly. It works well, that kind of approach, because you know you already start to capture the gesture of individual types of trees, and there is a variety of trees, so you want to think about that. But generally we're just looking for kind of a sense of atmosphere, a general statement of tones, So we're figuring out kind of how light or how dark different parts are going to go. So we've got a good idea of how that's going to develop through the drawing. And then next week we'll be going in and kind of smoothing and refining and kind of editing, altering those layers before going into detail. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'll see you guys on the next session. As always, you can subscribe to our channel to receive more videos like this, or keep updated with more videos like this, and click through to the OCAD page to sign up to courses with us. Yeah, that's it, and I'll see everyone soon.